Before 1800, most of America's trade and transportation was by ship with Europe, or between the large coastal cities, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Charleston. After the War of 1812, the new nation was taking root. People began to move inland, westward. A steady wave of European immigration had doubled America's population during the past 25 years. In the next 25 years, it would double again. In 1815, recognizing the growing need for land transportation, Colonel John Stevens obtained a charter from the New Jersey legislature to build the first steam railroad in America. Stevens had a charter and a dream, but he couldn't get money. Financial experts dismissed the idea as a wild and impractical scheme. In the early 19th century, transportation money was going into road construction, canals, and rivercraft. Toll roads or turnpikes were suitable for stagecoaches, but for hauling freight, the cost was too high. On the back roads, both stagecoaches and wagons were plagued by a common enemy, mud. In 1825, the long-awaited Erie Canal was completed. A commercial triumph, it swept the young nation into a passion for canals. Before long, hundreds of these beautiful but expensive ditches adorned the American landscape. But only one canal, the Erie, was a financial success. On the rivers, rafts and flatboats were giving way to steam-driven paddle boats. These elegant and palatial craft dominated the large rivers, but they could not penetrate the great landlocked interior. Towns, cities, even states, which were once content to remain isolated, were now anxious to be tied together. But this would require a revolution in transportation. The revolution began in England. Back in 1804, Richard Trevithick combined a steam engine with a railway mine car to produce the first locomotive. English inventors pioneered locomotive construction and put railroads to public use. England's success made some Americans curious. But as late as 1825, John Stevens still couldn't get people to invest in a railroad. In frustration, he built a small steam wagon and ran it on a track near his home. It was the first locomotive to run on rails in America. The Industrial Revolution on both sides of the Atlantic was creating a whirlwind of experimentation. For mechanics and inventors, it was a heyday. For the railroad, progress. By the late 1820s, Americans were ready to try their hand at railroading. Although at first it was necessary to import locomotives from England. In 1830, however, an American-built locomotive named Tom Thumb made a trial run for America's first chartered railroad, the Baltimore and Ohio. During the run, Tom Thumb was challenged by a horse-drawn rail car. The horse started fast. Then, picking up steam, the locomotive forged into the lead. But when a blower failed, the horse claimed victory. Perhaps its last. Blood and muscle were no match for the raw power, speed, and endurance of this new breed of horse. America's first passenger service began on Christmas Day, 1830. A locomotive named the Best Friend of Charleston rattled along at the terrifying speed of 20 miles an hour. Six months later, its firemen became annoyed at the escaping steam and fastened down the safety valve. Both friend and fireman were blown up. But it was a triumphant age. People marveled at this bold new creation, marveled that it worked at all. With blind enthusiasm, they overlooked the fact that boilers sometimes exploded, that rigid locomotives jumped the track on sharp curves, that fiery smokestacks showered soot and sparks on captive passengers, and jerky starts and stops threw them out of their seats. Meanwhile, careful businessmen noted that railroad freight charges were only 1/4 as much as turnpike tolls. Wagon fees could be cut by 1/3. Although canal rates were cheaper, canal boats averaged 4 miles an hour downstream and 2 miles an hour upstream. And what's more, the shallow water froze in winter. Railroads could run year-round, in all kinds of weather, and every day of the week, except, of course, on Sunday. Railroads could haul larger volumes and all kinds of goods faster than any other type of transport. And for a nation bent toward Western expansion, their timing was perfect. Perfect, except for barriers that lay to the west. Barriers that caused even bold surveyors to pause, shake their heads, and turn back. In time, these barriers were overcome. Yet most railroads would build for more than 20 years in order to reach their original western destinations. By 1840, charters had been granted in 22 states, and 3,000 miles of track had been laid. For some, railroads still remained a novelty. For others, the celebrated joke of the 1830s was fast becoming a serious commercial threat. But the railroad could not be stopped. And with increased safety and mechanical advances, it began to sweep rival forms of transportation from its path. Larger, more powerful locomotives were built, and swiveling front-wheel trucks kept them on the track. Smokestacks had built-in spark arresters. Engine cabs covered open platforms. Stone blocks were replaced by wooden crossties. Wooden rails topped with iron straps were replaced by the solid iron T-rail. And safety features protected man and beast. Between 1840 and 1850, the nation's rail network tripled in mileage. During this decade, railroads became a force of industrial progress. They no longer just maintained commerce, they created it. Wherever the iron rail and the flanged wheel went, it opened new markets for merchants, new farmland for settlers, and new jobs for everyone from managers to day laborers. In the 1840s, Daniel Webster declared that the railroad towered above all other inventions in this or the preceding age. Yet, less than 25 years before, that old prophet of steam, John Stevens, could not get money to build a railroad because his idea was too wild and too impractical. In 1851, New York City officials presented a citation to the Erie Railroad. Resolved, that we hail the completion of this gigantic and stupendous work as emphatically the work of the age. Impressive words for a method of transportation still in its adolescence. For the railroad, however, maturity lay ahead. There was a nation to build and a nation to bind. After the 1840s, railroads experienced phenomenal growth. Rail lines had tied together the eastern coastal cities. Now they touched the western waters of Lake Erie and the Ohio and Tennessee rivers, rivers that flowed into the Mississippi. Railroad schedules were forcing people to change their concept of time. On the Pennsylvania Railroad, it took 15 hours to get from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh. By stagecoach, the same journey took 6 days. Past the Alleghenies and past the Appalachians lay America's heartland, the prairie, a vast domain stretching for miles. But the tough prairie sod stuck like glue to the iron plows of the first settlers. Then, in 1837, an Illinois blacksmith named John Deere discovered that plows made with steel blades would cut and turn over the rich clay soil. And Cyrus McCormick's new invention, the mechanical reaper, multiplied harvests. Windmills took advantage of the strong prairie winds to pump water and run machines. Now, settlers began to carve out homesteads. In Europe, political unrest. In Ireland, a potato famine. Refugees seeking a new life in a new land came to America. Some took their chances and bought prairie farms. Others became tenant farmers for Western landowners. And in this wilderness, devoid of roads and large rivers, iron tentacles began to spread everywhere. They were the vital link that got the goods to market. Because of their speed and hauling capacity, railroads could move perishable products like milk and fruit, or carry heavy raw materials and manufactured goods between eastern cities and inland settlements. And in the wake of this rail traffic, civilization followed. Railroad towns began to spring up all over. Most had high hopes of someday becoming a major rail junction, like Atlanta or Chattanooga. But most, like Sturgis, Michigan, ended up a whistle stop. In 1850, the federal government gave the Illinois Central Railroad alternate sections of land adjacent to its right-of-way. This land was then sold to settlers. 6 years later, with 700 miles of track, the Illinois Central was the longest railroad in the world. Between 1850 and 1860, about 20 million acres of public lands were granted to railroads. In return for land grants, railroads were required to transport government personnel, property, and mail at reduced rates. For the government, there was another advantage. Only a small portion of its 1.5 billion acres of heartland had been sold, even at the giveaway price of $1.25 an acre. According to one senator, the rest of the land could lay there for 500 years if dependable transportation could not be provided. During this period, the locomotive became more than just a mechanical marvel or a powerful machine. It was taking on style and class. Bright-colored engines, prized by the engineer and a builder's delight, came complete with shiny brass trim and elaborate scrollwork. To 19th century Americans, these gaudy wood burners were pretty enough to set in their parlors. Trains had captured the minds of hard-nosed businessmen. Now, they captured the hearts of the people. The rush and roar of a passing train filled spectators with awe and wonder. What boy did not secretly hope to one day become an engineer or a conductor? A distant blast of the whistle could be the call of destiny, a call to adventure, freedom, and new possibilities. Trains were going farther and farther west, and west was the direction young people were told they ought to go. By the middle of the 19th century, America's frontier had stretched well beyond the Mississippi River. And across the continent, the far west was booming. There was cheap farmland in Oregon and gold in California. By 1855, government survey crews had mapped out 5 railroad routes to the Pacific Ocean. By the late 1850s, tracks had crossed the state of Missouri and reached the western frontier. Back east, railroads continued to grow at an astounding rate. The city of Boston had 7 railroads and 7 railroad stations. And on the shore of Lake Michigan, Chicago, a swampy frontier village of 300 in the 1830s, was now served by 11 different railroads, making it the largest rail center in the nation. But as ribbons of iron began to pull the agrarian West closer to the industrial East, the North and South were torn apart by civil war. For the first time, railroads were involved in large-scale warfare. It was a time of frenzied building and a time of frenzied destruction. Armies supplied by wagons could operate only 100 miles from their base. Any farther, and the teams going and coming would consume the contents of their wagons. Railroads, however, could move troops and supplies at speeds and distances never before possible. Generals on both sides stayed up late, trying to match the rules of war they had learned at West Point with the logistics of the railroad. But between North and South, there were powerful distinctions. The North had nearly 3 times as much track, and its equipment, personnel, and material resources were far superior. The Erie and Pennsylvania railroads alone had more locomotives than all of the Confederacy. And even more critical, the Confederacy did not have factories to build new ones. During the war, events like Andrews Raid etched railroads into history books. In April 1862, at Big Shanty, Georgia, 20 Union raiders, disguised as civilians, stole a Confederate locomotive. Their objective? Burn bridges and destroy rail between Atlanta and Chattanooga. Led by their conductor, Southern crewmen pursued, on foot, by handcar, and finally by locomotive. Mile after mile, the chase continued. The close pursuit prevented the Union raiders from carrying out their plans. About 20 miles short of Chattanooga, the general ran out of fuel. All 20 raiders were captured. Andrews and 7 others were hanged. In one of the final campaigns of the war, Sherman's March to the Sea, a rail line nearly 500 miles long, supplied over 100,000 troops. Afterwards, General Sherman said that his extensive campaign would have been impossible without the railroad. At the close of the war, a special train left the capital of the reunited States. The same rails that had carried a victorious president to Washington 4 years earlier now guided his body back home to the plains of Illinois. Abraham Lincoln had fought to keep the North and the South united. In 1862, during grave moments of the war, he had signed into law the Pacific Railroad Act. This act provided for the building of the first transcontinental railroad, a railroad that would soon unite
and men's celebration. You joined our country as one in your
Keep quiet.
On this grand
When the last
auspicious
spike is driven,
celebration
we'll say, done.
Amen.
Stand by. We've got done praying. The signal will be 3 dots.
Promontory Summit, Utah, May 10, 1869. Across plains and deserts, across rivers and mountains, 2 iron rails connect ocean to ocean. At last, the Pacific Railroad is done. As early as the 1830s, when trains first began to haul freight and passengers, people dreamed about a railroad that would someday cross the continent. Romantics envisioned a great and majestic achievement. Later on, Businessmen wanted to speed up trade with gold-rich California. Some even predicted a lucrative trade with the Orient. National leaders saw it as a way to eliminate the Indian threat to settlement in the West, and as a way to bind America's far west resources to the rest of the nation. By the 1850s, with Oregon a territory and California a state, the future of the United States lay to the west. But to get there, it took time, lots of time. 1 month, day and night, by stagecoach. 5 months by wagon. 6 months, half a year, to go around the tip of South America. Another route, a shortcut across the Isthmus of Panama, led to the construction of the Panama Railroad. In 1855, it became the first transcontinental. Also in 1855, Army surveyors completed the exploration of 5 possible routes to the Pacific Ocean. But there were political delays, and there was turmoil over slavery. When southern states threatened to leave the Union, northern politicians grabbed for California. First, the Pony Express. 18 months later, the Transcontinental Telegraph. In 1862, during the Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Pacific Railroad Act. The Central Pacific is to build east from Sacramento, the Union Pacific west from Omaha. To lay 2,000 miles of iron rail through parched deserts and towering mountains would cost more than any other single enterprise up to that time. For every mile of track completed, each company would receive thousands of dollars in government loans and up to 10 square miles of land. However, by January 1866, 3.5 years after the signing of the Pacific Railroad Act, both companies have completed less than 100 miles of track. Skeptics are convinced that a cross-country railroad will never be built. But after the Civil War, men, money, and supplies are available. The government has doubled land grants, and the meeting place is left indefinite. Therefore, whichever company lays the most track gets the most money and land. Now, on a vast stage, the great undertaking becomes a tense rivalry. It will be a race to the finish. Building east from Sacramento, the Central Pacific team is led by 4 men. They are not railroad men, they are merchants. They have risked their fortunes and reputations to build a railroad because of the trade it will bring. Collis Huntington, financial boss. Mark Hopkins, bookkeeper. Leland Stanford, president. Charles Crocker, construction chief. Building west from Omaha, the Union Pacific is headed by Dr. Thomas Durant. A physician turned railroad man, Durant figures that the big money will not be in running a railroad, but in building it. In 1866, Durant hires General Grenville Dodge to take command as chief engineer. Dodge divides his workforce into 4 teams. Out front, surveyors work several hundred miles in advance of the main party. They determine the route the railroad will take. Next come the graders, cutting and blasting the terrain into a level roadbed. Behind the graders come the bridge, culvert, and tunnel crews. And finally, the track layers. Irish immigrants, German immigrants, Swedish immigrants, Civil War veterans, former slaves. There is opportunity here, and there is good pay. Opportunity, good pay, but hard work and hard weather. Blizzards, thunderstorms, spring floods, burning sun. Immigrants, Civil War veterans, former slaves. A ballet of muscle and iron. A grand anvil chorus playing across the plains. But for some ears, the ring is the sound of tragedy. When their traditional hunting grounds are violated, the Plains Indians strike back with vengeance. But when 5,000 soldiers are dispatched, the war party is over. Occasional raids cannot stop the Union Pacific. Meanwhile, in the High Sierra, Crocker is driving men and rails through solid rock, at times less than a foot a day. Earlier, even though the going was easier, workers had deserted for less strenuous occupations. In desperation, Crocker hires 50 Chinese laborers. To 19th century Americans, they are strange little men. They wear dishpan straw hats, long pigtails, and floppy blue pajamas. They eat cuttlefish, bamboo shoots, and rice, and their language is comically different. Yet Crocker knew their ancestors had built the Great Wall of China. Now they attack massive granite walls, dig tunnels, build bridges and snow sheds. And while other workers are laid low by polluted water or hard whiskey, they keep going on boiled tea. Crocker recruits them all the way from China. Sober, disciplined, and fearless, they will push the Central Pacific through the Sierra in record time. Summer, 1868. The Central Pacific is gobbling up miles of desert flatland, while the Union Pacific punches and blasts its way through the Rocky Mountains. As the track advances, so does the construction base camp. And following the base camp is the notorious Hell on Wheels, a collection of gambling dens and saloons, where workers are quickly relieved of some of the hardest dollars they will ever earn. The biggest threat to progress, however, comes at management level. Durant is constantly trying to lengthen the route so the Union Pacific can get more money and land grants. For the Central Pacific, problems are external. Back in the Sierra, 40-foot snowdrifts stop the passage of supplies. Work crews must return and build an additional 37 miles of snow sheds to protect the tracks. Another calamity is avoided when Crocker issues lifetime passes to tribal chiefs and riding privileges to distinguished braves. January 1869. The gap has closed to less than 500 miles, but still a meeting place has not been established. The race becomes frantic. Survey lines had already overlapped by several hundred miles. Now, grading crews are building roadbeds right past each other. Before long, they are fighting each other. Finally, the government steps in and negotiates a meeting place. Promontory Summit, Utah. May 10th, 1869. A flat, barren valley, a bright, clear day. 2 engines, 2 missing rails between them, and a half a world behind them. Now several hundred spectators will observe the climactic event of the Pacific Railroad. The festivities are not without humor. Both Stanford and Durant miss the spike. But the telegrapher flashes the signal, done. Promontory celebrates. Americans everywhere celebrate. Once again, people had to change their concept of time. Now, only 11 days to cross the whole country. Everyone wanted to ride the Transcontinental. It was hailed as the greatest physical achievement of the 19th century. But it was not an end. It was a beginning. Within a single generation, 4 more routes were built across the continent. There were almost no roads or navigable rivers. Before long, train tracks were going everywhere. In Kansas, they hooked up with the great cattle drives from Texas. From railheads at Wichita, Abilene, and Dodge City, carloads of beef were sent east to change people's diets. From Europe, railroads recruited thousands of immigrants and brought them west to settle the Great Plains and beyond. 4 transcontinentals, tracks going everywhere. 50 years earlier, railroads had been dismissed as a wild and impractical scheme. By the late 1800s, the question was no longer, will they survive? The question was, where will they stop? By the late 1800s, it was obvious. No one could deny it. Railroads were steaming straight into their golden era. Vaughan, Mississippi, April 30th, 1900. Making up for lost time, a speeding passenger train crashes into a stalled freight train. Only one person, the engineer of the passenger train, is killed. 6'4" John Luther Jones was one of the best engineers on the Illinois Central. In life, he was a hero. In death, he became a legend.
Casey Jones, he pushed on the throttle. Casey Jones was a brave engineer. Come on, Casey, and blow the whistle so they all can hear.
Casey Jones became a popular folk hero because of a song. The song, however, only reflected the widespread popularity of railroads at that time.
She'll be coming round the mountain when she comes. She'll be coming round the mountain when she comes. She'll be coming round the mountain. She'll be coming round the mountain. She'll be coming round the mountain when she comes.
From the end of the Civil War to the turn of the century, railroad track in America increased from 35,000 miles to 193,000 miles. More than 150,000 miles in just 35 years. By 1893, 5 different railroads had reached the Pacific Ocean. And between oceans, between the Atlantic and the Pacific, the land was being invaded by a spider web of rails. For railroads, there was no competition. They were sitting triumphantly on the throne of transportation. But even beyond that, no industry so dominated the American scene or so touched every aspect of American life as did the railroad. Steam locomotives required a lot of fuel and water, and they required track that was fairly level and fairly straight. Yet none of these requirements kept railroads from building through dry deserts and high mountains. From mountain and desert, from forest and plain, they carried the natural resources of a growing industrial nation. They carried livestock and agricultural products. In refrigerated cars, they carried perishable items from coast to coast. Railroads not only carried the mail, they were a moving post office where letters and packages were sorted en route. Railroads even carried clowns and elephants. Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey boasted that their train was 1 1/3 miles long and loaded with 10,000 wonders from every land. In the West, railroads carried soldiers to fight Indians. And when the fighting came to an end, they carried Indians to areas of confinement called reservations. Back in the 1850s and 60s, the federal government gave some western railroads land along their right-of-way. But this land was useless to these railroads until it was settled. It wasn't long before railroad agents back east and in Europe were promoting the great American desert as a well-watered and fertile Garden of Eden. Salesmanship on both sides of the Atlantic was at a creative high and a moral low. Kansas was placed in the banana belt, where winters were mild and lasted only 2 months. Immigrants were told, rain follows the plow. And they were told that moving trains changed the electricity in the atmosphere, which in turn increased precipitation. These and other enticements helped to persuade thousands of immigrants to come west, only to discover that this subtropical climate was plagued with droughts and blizzards. Against these odds, many stayed and persevered, and they and their descendants transformed the treeless prairie into the breadbasket of the world. Although railroads were guilty of misleading immigrants, they did not mislead tourists, as trains were taking them to see some of the great scenic wonders of the West. Not only did railroads take tourists to these places, they also built hotels and lodges for them to stay in. In the Colorado Rockies, tourists could ride a cog railway all the way to the top of 14,000-foot-high Pikes Peak. Back east, in the state of New Hampshire, tourists were pushed up a steep incline to the top of Mount Washington, New England's highest mountain. P.T. Barnum claimed it was the second greatest show on Earth. Off the southern tip of Florida, passengers could ride out over the ocean on the Key West extension of the Florida East Coast Railway. Half on land, half on water, it was the bold dream of Henry Morrison Flagler. Flagler had made millions as a partner in John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company, and he spent millions to build the Florida East Coast Railway. From Jacksonville south through swamp and jungle, tracks reached Miami in 1896. To attract tourists to the warm climate and pristine beaches, Flagler built a string of palatial hotels along the Florida coast. Tourists came, and a lot of them stayed, creating a land boom that set the stage for his next big project. In 1905, at age 75, he would again spend millions to build what was at first called Flagler's Folly, and later on, the railroad that goes to sea. When asked how he could expect to build such a railroad, Flagler replied, "It's perfectly simple. All you have to do is build one concrete arch, and then another, and pretty soon you'll find yourself in Key West." It took 8 years to complete, and several hundred lives were lost during construction. But there was no denying the ride was spectacular. Travelers could watch dolphins leaping, pelicans diving, and sharks pacing the train as it moved slowly across the long bridges. Flagler barely lived to see the tracks reach Key West, and he was long gone when in 1935, a killer hurricane washed out more than half of the roadbed. The extension was not rebuilt, and the sturdy bridges which survived the hurricane were used for the new highway to Key West. As more and more trains took more and more people to more and more places, it became apparent that something had to be done about train schedules. In the 19th century, it was customary for towns and cities to set their own time of day, quite independently of each other. This, of course, made scheduling a nightmare. Noon in Chicago was 12:31 in Pittsburgh, 11:50 in St. Louis, and 11:27 in Omaha. In exasperation, railroads divided the country into 4 separate time zones. Although this was done in 1883, Congress did not officially adopt these time zones until 35 years later, in 1918. For railroads, the golden years were a time of innovation and improvement. Along with standardized time, there was standardized track. In 1886, track gauge, the distance between rails, was standardized at 4 feet 8 1/2 inches. Before that, the differences in track gauge had caused serious interruptions to freight and passenger service. The remaining exception to standard gauge was narrow and used where space or finances were limited. Some innovations and improvements were aimed at working conditions. In 1888, more than 2,000 workers were killed on the job and over 20,000 injured. Air brakes, invented by George Westinghouse, and automatic couplers, invented by Eli Janney, were not made mandatory until 1893, although both had been patented 20 years earlier. Before air brakes, brakemen rode on top of the cars, turning the brake wheel on one car and then jumping to the next. This was a risky procedure in good weather and a downright dangerous one in bad weather. In contrast to hand brakes, air brakes were operated by the engineer in the locomotive. Before the automatic coupler, a link and pin system required switchmen to go between moving cars. It was a tricky operation, and clumsiness or bad timing could result in the loss of fingers or hands. At worst, it meant being crushed to death. In contrast to the link and pin, the automatic coupler was operated by a lever on the side of the car, and switchmen no longer had to risk life and limb by going between moving cars. The telegraph, which railroads had begun to use as early as 1851, was also slow to catch on. Yet before the telegraph, it was not uncommon for 2 trains to sit and wait for hours, each fearful that the other might be starting down the same track. In a matter of seconds, the telegraph could relay messages between stations. Although Morse code pounded out on brass keys did not eliminate delays and accidents, it was a vast improvement over everything that preceded it. For locomotives, the emphasis was on speed and hauling capacity. Speed was increased by increasing horsepower and wheel size. And in 1893, a New York Central train set a world speed record by going 112 miles an hour. Hauling capacity was increased by making bigger locomotives and by adding more driving wheels. Some locomotives were designed with only hauling capacity in mind. Shays, Heislers, and Climaxes, these geared locomotives, could drive on all wheels with high traction. For the most part, they worked in logging or mining areas where there were sharp curves and steep grades. In 1904, locomotive power reached a peak with the articulated compounds. These monsters had 2 engines, 2 sets of driving wheels, used steam twice, and were hinged in the middle so they could take normal curves. Articulated compounds were used primarily in mountain areas and had the pulling power of 2 or 3 smaller locomotives. Steam and air. If you stop and think about it, it seems incredible. Trains weighing thousands of tons were powered by steam and stopped by air. In 1895, another power source was introduced, and it was just as amazing. How could electric current flowing through a single wire move something as big as a train? At first, electric locomotives were used in tunnels or congested areas where smoke was a hazard. Later on, some railroads electrified a significant portion of their lines. During the golden years, along with upgrading equipment, railroads were paying more attention to passenger comfort, an area that in the past was often described as uncivilized. As a traveling railroad agent, Fred Harvey had seen the worst, and the worst of the worst was the depot restaurant. Not only were they overcrowded and dirty with bland food and uninspired menus, but customers had to pay when they ordered and were given only 10 minutes to eat. Sometimes restaurant owners bribed conductors to blow the departure whistle early, and unfinished meals were then reassembled for the next unsuspecting arrivals. In 1875, Harvey's plan to reduce indigestion and promote dignity was accepted by the Santa Fe. Starting in Topeka, Kansas, his restaurant offered good food in a clean place at a reasonable price. It was an instant success, and by the time of his death in 1901, he and the Santa Fe owned and operated 47 restaurants, 15 hotels, and 30 dining cars. Harvey houses rarely showed a profit, but they served the best food in the West, and it was served by wholesome girls who had answered Harvey's advertisement for young women of good character, attractive and intelligent. Out West, men greatly outnumbered women, so most Harvey girls didn't stay employed long before they quit and got married. Quite a few, however, honored their former boss by naming their firstborn son either Fred or Harvey. While Fred Harvey was relieving the digestive tract, George Pullman was making it easier on the lumbar vertebra. Early railroads were notorious for their lack of amenities. Hard seats and cramped sleeping quarters made long train trips a test of endurance. However, by the 1870s, Pullman's improved design for sleeping cars began to turn complaints into compliments. By the 1890s, the name Pullman was synonymous with elegance and luxury, and Pullman Palace cars were the ultimate in train travel. Plush upholstery, hand-carved inlaid paneling, stained glass windows, steam heat and electric lights, and porters who would respond to every whim. In the 1870s, a leading architect claimed that train stations would be to the 19th century what cathedrals and monasteries were to the 13th century. By the end of the 19th century, it was obvious that this prediction was coming true. After the Civil War, some railroads were making men wealthy, and some of these wealthy men did not hesitate to spend their money on big and elaborate passenger stations. These stations were, of course, way beyond what was required to wait for a train. Grand Central Station, New York City. It was not the biggest or most elaborate station in the world, nor was it the busiest. It was simply the most famous. It was famous for its grand concourse. In the center of the concourse, the Golden Clock was everybody's meeting place. See you at the Golden Clock in Grand Central. Grand Central was also famous for its trains. Trains like the Empire State Express and the 20th Century Limited. The 20th Century, one of the fastest trains between New York City and Chicago, rolled out a red carpet for all arrivals and departures. The first Grand Central was built by Cornelius Vanderbilt in 1871. It was rebuilt and enlarged around the turn of the century, but it was still too small. By this time, there was no room to expand, so the station was built on 2 levels. The upper level had 123 tracks, the lower level 57. After 10 years of construction, the third and last Grand Central was completed in 1915. It was a great success, both functional in operation and architecturally a showpiece. Not far from Grand Central, the Pennsylvania Railroad built the magnificent Pennsylvania Station. Completed in 1910, it covered 28 acres and was the eastern terminus for the Broadway Limited, Pennsylvania's fast train to Chicago that rivaled the 20th century in speed and luxury. Big city stations, large and impressive. Yet for every big city station, there were hundreds of small town stations. They were often called depots. And because the news, the mail, the Sears and Roebuck catalog, and just about everything else came or left by train, these depots were always a place of endless activity, and more often than not, the town's main attraction. Out west, roads were scarce, and most small towns needed a railroad to survive. But many of these towns soon discovered they needed more than one. One railroad, without competition, could charge high rates and set its own schedule. Competition, on the other hand, led to rate wars, and rate wars could ruin railroads. Rate wars, overbuilding, and mismanagement put a lot of railroads in financial straits. Then came the Depression, or financial panic, of 1893. In 1893, 156 railroads went bankrupt. Railroads were caught between the demands of farmers and merchants who were angry about high rates and indefinite shipping schedules, and the demands of railroad workers who were angry about low wages and poor working conditions. To fight railroads, farmers joined the National Grange, and railroad workers organized unions. Farmers boycotted, and railroad workers held strikes, some of which became violent. In 1887, the federal government established a 5-man Interstate Commerce Commission to investigate unfair rates and other questionable practices. As a result, railroads became the first industry to be both unionized and subject to federal regulation. At first, the ICC was too weak to curb the strongly entrenched railroads. But additional legislation in the early 1900s strengthened its powers of enforcement. For railroads, it was a time of cutthroat competition and intense rivalries. Big railroads were swallowing up little ones. And most of these big railroads were controlled by a handful of men who did their business in New York City on a narrow street named Wall. During the Golden Age, railroads were the biggest commodity on the New York Stock Exchange, and the men who bought and sold them became both famous and infamous as the kingpins of American railroads. Cornelius Vanderbilt, a wealthy businessman who made his first fortune on water, his second on land. At age 70, he turned from shipping magnate to railroad entrepreneur. When he died in 1877, he was the richest man in America, with assets of more than $100 million. In his 12 years of railroading, he laid the foundation for the New York Central system. Jay Gould, the unpredictable wizard of Wall Street. For a quiet, devoted family man who shunned publicity, Gould was constantly in the limelight. He was notorious for his stock manipulations that kept the experts guessing and brought him the wrath and indignation of both press and public. In 1890, he controlled about half of all railroad mileage in the Southwest. After his death in 1892, his railroad empire was expanded and then lost by his eldest son, George. Edward Harriman, a shrewd businessman who tried to capture every major railroad in the West. At one time, he owned or controlled 75,000 miles of track and 3 major systems: the Illinois Central, the Union Pacific, and the Southern Pacific. Harriman, it was said, collected railroads like some millionaires collected rare paintings. James Hill, a man with many nicknames: Little Giant, Oregon Bandit, Red River Pirate, and Empire Builder. Hill built the Great Northern without government aid, and then added feeder lines to make it prosperous. He tangled with Gould and won. He tangled with Harriman and won. Hill, a railroad man from head to foot, was not above grabbing a shovel and lending a hand if the situation required it. J. Pierpont Morgan, a wealthy banker who gained a reputation as a mediator. His skill lay in getting railroads to settle their differences by compromise. If they didn't or couldn't compromise, he would sometimes buy out one or all. By 1906, Morgan controlled 18,000 miles of track and 2 major systems, the Erie and the Southern. Although some of these railroad tycoons tried to put together a true transcontinental system, one that went from coast to coast, none succeeded. Actually, Collis Huntington, one of the original Big Four of the Central Pacific, came the closest. In the 1890s, he controlled the Southern Pacific and the Chesapeake and Ohio, and was closing the gap when he died in 1900 at age 78. In the early 1900s, strong anti-monopoly policies led by President Theodore Roosevelt broke up some of the larger systems. And at the same time, steam railroads encountered their first real competition. The toot of the air horn, the singing of the wires, and along came the electric trolley. A new electrical power system introduced in 1896 made electricity more economical and more accessible. Before long, trolley tracks were shooting out in every direction. The craze was called traction, and by the thousands, interurban trolleys were heading for the countryside. Interurban means between towns and cities, and compared to city trolleys, they were usually bigger and more powerful. Some had dining cars. Some had sleeping cars. Some even had parlor cars, complete with wicker furniture, carpets, and stained glass windows. On the other hand, it was not uncommon for interurbans to haul freight. Compared to steam railroads, they were cheaper to build and cheaper to operate, and they provided more frequent service at a much lower fare. Electric trolleys could start fast and run fast. On straightaways, they could go up to 70 miles an hour. Although some railroads vigorously fought interurbans, they were often a blessing in disguise, as most steam railroads lost money trying to provide passenger service to rural areas. Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin had the greatest concentration of track. And the city of Indianapolis was one of North America's greatest traction centers. A dozen routes, extending in every direction, linked Indianapolis with hundreds of towns and cities. In 1914, a peak year, 7 million passengers passed through the Indianapolis Traction Terminal. From ocean beaches to snow-capped mountains, the Pacific Electric serviced a trolley empire that had over 1,000 miles of track and reached more than 50 separate communities. Branching out from Los Angeles, it claimed to be the world's greatest interurban railway. And it probably was. For about 60 years, the Pacific Electric had more track, operated more cars, and hauled more passengers and freight than any other interurban. In the 1920s, many interurbans went out of business, victims of the Model T and the paved road. Henry Ford's assembly line production made automobiles more affordable, and paved roads made driving more practical. After the Great Depression of the 1930s, only the strongest interurban lines remained. The automobile and the paved road, deadly for the interurban, but not for steam railroads. They were by far America's biggest business in the 19th century, and early in the 20th century, railroad assets represented about 1/5 of the nation's total wealth. In 1916, there were 254,000 miles of track, and railroads carried 98% of all intercity passengers. In 1916, airplanes were no competition, as they were mostly two-seaters barnstorming the countryside. Yet in 1916, this 254,000 miles of track was an all-time high. There would never be more than that. Slowly but surely, rusty rails and weeded roadbeds began to appear, as abandoned tracks became an increasingly familiar sight. For railroads, there would still be bright spots in the future. Yet from the standpoints of expansion and use, the golden age of railroading had come to an end.